It's the end of the month and it is time for a what I read this month video. I don't always get this out on time to participate in a monthly collab, but there is in the description box below a playlist hosted by Mama Mia's Homeschool Chronicles and The Simple Rugged Path. And they put it out every month, and if you want to go see what everybody else is reading, you can go check the description box below. I also really enjoy seeing Emily from ARG Schooling. I love seeing what she has read. I'm going to share with you the books I read, but I also have been pre-reading children's books, and I want to share those with you. So 3 books that I read were part of the Who Was series. This one happens to be Who Was Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll actually was named Charles Dodgson, Charles Dodgson, and he was actually a pastor's son who was a very brilliant mathematician. He was a deacon and professor at Oxford. Suddenly I was like, okay, did he just go there or was he a teacher there? He was actually a teacher there. And, but he enjoyed children so much that he ended up telling his, the story of Alice in Wonderland to either a friend of his or a niece, and I can't remember which one it was, Alice Through the Looking Glass. And then he ended up writing Alice in Wonderland, and then he asked for the book back and wrote Alice Through the Looking Glass. He was actually more well known for his math books because he wanted math more attainable for everybody. He kept his fiction life or lighter life separate from his more serious person that he was. It was a really fascinating story. I'm really glad I read this. But the other 2 that I read with these, I've already had to take them back to the library, and that was Who Was Henry VIII and Who Was Gandhi. And both of those were fascinating. I did know more about Henry VIII. I didn't know a lot of things, and some things started to make more sense. Especially since there's this conflicting idea of who he was. Well, there was a horrible incident where he was actually knocked on the head and his personality changed greatly, or it was not expounded, but the more anger outbursts became more frequent and more of his personality than as just something that he was trying to work through. But anyway, a lot of Henry VIII, like I said, I knew a lot of it, but it was still a fascinating read, especially as we had just finished up that timeline in our history. I did not think it was appropriate for my children to read just because there is a lot of explanation and things like that that I'm not ready to do that. I could easily give this to my children. As for Gandhi, I wanted to understand more of who he was, and it was definitely an interesting read. Anyway, those are the kids' books that I'm previewing and reading. Out of all of them, that I would find okay for all levels or all ages would be Who Was Lewis Carroll, especially if you enjoy Alice in Wonderland, and there's a little bit more about that. Summer is coming to a close and my reading pile has dropped. A lot of these are finishings that haven't been started and completed in this month, but who's keeping track of that? The first one is The House That Cleans Itself by Mindy Starnes Clark. Sarah Janice Brown over at Fun Schooling started this mom summer school club, or mom summer book club, or something like that. This is one of the books recommended along with The Unhurried Homeschooler, Sarah Mackenzie's Teaching from Rest, and I had that on audiobook. I had already passed along my Unhurried Homeschooler. I read it. It was sweet, but there wasn't, like I said, what I remember most from it, I've taken away from that tiny little book, and that really was everything a child needs to know you can learn in 3 years. So that has been the thing that I've taken away the most, and I passed it along to another family to kind of bless them. But I had not heard of this one. I actually love this author. I only know her for her fiction books. Don't Take Away Any Wooden Nickels. She also did The Trouble with Tulip, which was one of our favorites as a teenager. So I'm going to leave the links to those books down in the description box below because I really enjoyed them. I know she also did a Amish mystery series that I know some of you that are watching my video, I really think you would enjoy those. So I will leave those linked down below. But the title in itself kind of intrigued me. And this was fascinating because Mindy Starnes Clark is actually not a really good homekeeper. She's pretty terrible, but you wouldn't know that, like, when I was reading the Trouble with Tulip series with the housekeeper and like all these housekeeping tips. I believe the Trouble with Tulip, she runs a housekeeping column with tips and stuff, and she had to come up with all these tips, and then that led to more research. Well, here I am writing this housekeeping book and I can't even keep a clean house. So I have a Goodreads review for this, so I will leave that link down below. Honestly, all of my Goodreads reviews are linked on my account, so just click it and you can see all the books that I am currently reading and what I thought of them. This one was really good for me just because I am not by natural a cleanie, and some of the things that she was talking about in here, they aren't stuff like what you would find, you know, in here, which is if you haven't used it within 6 months, it's time to throw it away or get rid of it kind of thing. Her philosophy is more, we don't think like that to begin with, so why are we even trying to do it? We actually need to think like a detective and use how we think in order to lay out our house and so that it's optimal for cleaning. And so there's a lot of basically use detective skills to kind of map out things, start looking at stuff like a hotel does, and there's several different steps to start implementing, putting the family together. Something that I think some of you would really like. I personally don't know if I could do it, but you basically get the kids out of the house for a while and then you go through each room and pray through it and ask the Holy Spirit to open your eyes to certain things. That's a little over spiritual for me. I don't know. Yeah, not ready for that, but I know that some of you, that would mean a lot to you, and so that's why I'm sharing that. There are time-saving tricks. There are some of the things that I was really thinking about was how, you know, you are the example that you want to set for your family. So if this is something that's a problem for you, that is probably a problem for your family, and if it bothers you, it probably bothers them as well. And there's just, it was really, really good. I did end up marking this. I try not to mark in books, and then I ended up marking it and highlighting it and coloring it and all this type of stuff because I realized that this was something that I would keep on my shelf, and it's not one that I will do every day, or I will read it very often, but I think there are just certain steps within there that I would find very helpful to my way of thinking, and because of that, then kind of refreshing that and getting more out of it, if that makes sense. Okay, the next nonfiction book that I read this month was A Prairie Girl's Faith by Stephen Hines, and I believe Creative Two Time Mom gave this to me last year for Christmas during our box exchange, and I just now picked it up and read it, and oh my goodness, I enjoyed every bit of it. And so far as biographies of what happened in the past, I haven't read a whole lot of those. I have 3 books about her, but I still haven't read them. I did know a little bit about Rose, just based off of conversations that I've had with my mother and some of the books that she's read about Rose. But what I really appreciated about this story was his approach to her faith and how it worked as a child, and how it looked like as an adult, how it looked like as a parent, and how it looked like during the struggles that she faced. Now there is a lot in here that I know, as I was reading some Goodreads reviews, that some people really didn't like kind of the randomness that he seemed to present a lot of this, and I understand what they're saying. A lot of it has to go with like some of the quiet years that we don't know about through the books. Again, if you're like me and you hadn't read anything else, then this is kind of new information to you, but it wasn't really new for anybody else. Who Ma and Pa were during the quiet years. I think it was between banks of Plum Creek and Silver Shores and Little Town. Like there was, I think it was banks of Plum Creek and Silver Shores where Mary has gone blind, and there was like a little bit of silence in between those years and kind of some of the stuff that they dealt with. And it was really interesting for me, and I really actually got a lot out of Laura and Rose, kind of their story. Laura was definitely more self-conscious about when she did wrong, and Rose thought she over-spiritualized everything within her books, Laura's books. See, because Rose was the author, and she was the paper writer and everything, but when it got up in years for Laura, she kind of needed to come up with an income, and that's why she turned to writing. And so Rose was giving some tips, and she's, you know, trying to say, well, you need to do this and you need to do that, and Laura is just wanting to basically share her stories. And that was probably the most interesting thing I had about this. Yeah, there was some things that were randomly thrown in. There's some, you know, recipes that I will never make because it's all sugar and wheat. But I think some people would really enjoy using those. But I was really inspired by, here is Rose choosing a path that wasn't really something that Laura would have done. It was eye-opening to me. Something I didn't know is that Rose was sent to Eliza Jane for a few years, Almanzo's sister. The personality of Rose was really developed during that time, and who Laura was as a mom. Like, they would get into some arguments over certain things, but Laura still knew that Rose had to make her own decisions, and I was just inspired by that, because I know that there's always a chance that my children will choose differently than what I believe. I was really inspired by that. I really liked when Manly, what she called her husband, he basically, life changed for him, and he ended up really sick, and then he couldn't do the hard work that he did. And probably something that I have always carried with me within reading books is the strong woman mentality. The woman that works really hard, the one that saves the money, you know, has that egg money that nobody knows about. That person has always just what I aspired to, and Laura was that way, and I really loved reading that about her. This is an ARC copy, so I believe in a non-advanced reader copy you can get pictures and different things like that, and so that might be worth seeing what you can find. Okay, the last nonfiction book that I read this month was Maria by Maria von Trapp. So this one is basically her story. She wrote another book, the Von Trapp family, or the Von Trapp singers. I can't remember which one that is. And we used to have it, and we haven't been able to find the book. I know it's here somewhere. I just know it. Anyway, this is more her story. This is Maria's backstory. And this is basically her journey of faith from her childhood all the way up until, you know, as she's writing it. So up until, you know, the last 1960s. And some of the things that I really thought was interesting was that she was actually very anti-God. She had a horrible childhood. Her father didn't even want her and gave her to a relative, and then came back, and then she could never please him, and she ended up in a boarding school where or college, I can't remember which one, it might have been both or one or the other, but basically she denounced God and was actually trying to bring a community against God throughout the school. And then at one point her life turned around and she went for the strictest convent of all. That's what she wanted. And it was really hard because here she was out in the beautiful hills and sunshine, and this was, you know, how she got closer to God, and now she went to the strictest convent. And then, as it turned out, she went to Captain Von Trapp, which, to be honest, when I was reading this and knowing the movie, it seemed like it was reversed. Like, more of Captain Von Trapp's tendencies were more Maria, and Von Trapp was more of the gentle, quiet type of man, not the strict, by the whistle type of person. It didn't seem like that, but I might have misunderstood something in here. But probably the funniest part of this, which is why I won't give it to my daughter yet, is that he proposed to her, and she's like, well, I don't need to get married, I can take care of your children, why do we need to change anything, this is alright. And he's just like, huh. Yeah. And then she got married, and then she realized everything, and she's like, I've been gypped. That was hysterical. She got so mad at God. She's like, it's like, you know, here I am, your bride, and you just tossed me off to another groom, and that's kind of how I feel like right now, so peace out, God. And she had to kind of get over that. So I thought that was hysterical. Ah. Oh, those Victorian times, right? But the poor dear, at the same time, she didn't have parents, so who would explain that to her? A convent full of nuns. Anyway, she was also a terrible financial person. Basically messed up the rights to The Sound of Music, so they never got a penny from it. And they ended up owning and operating like this retreat with a gift shop, and she was horrible at finances until her son took over. And they ended up with like 10 kids, I believe. And some of them had died, or 1 or 2 had died. Yeah, it was really interesting. With it, a lot of it had to do with her Catholic faith, but she had like bouts of depression. She seemed a little bit charismatic for Catholics, but I don't know. I've never been a Catholic. I know when the revivalist was kind of coming through the world, and they had, at this point, they had gotten to America. She's like, well, why don't Catholics have it? And then the Catholics had like this Holy Spirit revival, and so she was able to do that. And it wasn't what she expected, and then it was. So there's a little bit of that in there, but in the end, it was definitely really interesting. A lot of the culture in here was definitely fun to read, and I'm keeping this on my shelf so it's not going adios, and I'm sure I'll read it again someday. So the last 2 books I have are fiction books, and I have A Song Unheard by Rosanna White. This is the second book over from the Shadows over England. The first book was A Name Unknown, and I had already read that and done a review for that. If I remember which video that was, I will leave it linked down below. But this one is the second one, and this is about her sister. And if you kind of remember, basically they're a bunch of thieves getting together in their family, and they work together, and they have a little bit of a Robin Hood to it. But she ends up being like this really gifted violinist, and she is sent basically to get this code. So I don't know how much cut off, unfortunately. Basically, the Belgian violinist is trying to get back to Belgium to rescue his mother and sister, who at the current time have a German living within their house that you just fall in love with. And I really hope that they do a 3rd book involving this German, because I want to know more about him. Her past kind of deals with a lot of her insecurities to the present, of course. Why not? So she doesn't have a good view of fathers or even men, and but particularly fathers. And then she hears that God is called the loving Father, and of course at that point she wants nothing to do with him. She's like, yeah, I know how loving fathers are. Basically, there is so much wrapped up into this book. I know my mom preferred this one over the first one. I personally really enjoyed the first one, and I think I retained more of the first one than I did of this one. But this one was definitely really, really good. A lot of the history behind the Belgium was definitely interesting for World War I. And just some of the other stuff that kind of happens behind the scenes, especially with, I think it's the Gestapo. I don't think that was a World War II term, but basically some of the stuff that they dealt with, the German soldiers, and especially through his point of view, where some things come to light that you know about, and you kind of, okay, I'm afraid I'm going to share too much if I say anything else. But anyway, it was really good. I would recommend reading this. And I know that a lot of my viewers enjoy Christian fictions because they're clean reads. And I would really highly recommend this. I think it was really good. Okay, so The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie by Ellen Bradley. Funny enough, a friend of mine had loaned this to me. She had given it to me a while ago, and then I picked it up and I couldn't get into it. I set it down. Suddenly, Instagram is just, I'm seeing this everywhere. And so I pick it up again and I'm trying to get in and I'm trying to get in. And then once I kind of understood what was going on with this character, because she's young, Flavia. She's a young character. She's kind of a Nancy Drew, and it's told in the first person. I really struggle with stuff in the first person. And I think that was a lot of why I was trying to get through this. But in the end, it was very enjoyable. I kind of like those Grantchester mysteries where, yeah, they're predictable. Unlike Grantchester mysteries, this is one case rather than several cases within a book. But it still has like that English charm to it. It still kind of had a lot of twists and turns and multiple characters that you kind of wonder how they all get pieced together. There was definitely some humorous points in here. What basically happens is there's a bird with this postage stamp that lands on the doorstep. The father flips out, and then later on that night, Flavia hears, like, she's into chemistry and potions, and that's something that was really fascinating about this, was the information in here. Like, there's all these hidden gems of art and music and chemistry and all these little things that like I could understand. So that, I think, was the most fascinating thing about this, was how this author brilliantly put it in here in a way that I could comprehend and understand. And but anyway, she is into poisons. She's very into poisons. She hears her father arguing with this man, and then later on, she finds him in the garden. On his breath is like this one word, and basically she's going to find out who the killer is because she thinks it's her father. So throughout the whole story, more characters are introduced. You've got a very interesting gardener that you don't really understand his story, but it was definitely fun. Even still, I don't quite feel like I know the gardener's story the full way, and I would like to understand more. And I know that there's more in the series, so I will be trying to get those through the library. So that's something about it. What else? She has two sisters, and they're always fighting. And like sisters, she's trying to show some love, and it kind of backfires, and so she retaliates. And so there's a little bit of that, you know, I think we can all appreciate a little bit. But yeah, so it was definitely really enjoyable. I thought it was something that I may or may not pick up again. I don't really know. I know that I want to read the rest of the series, but insofar as what I thought of this book, again, it was predictable for me. So maybe that's what's called a cozy mystery, but it's not really small. I don't know. I would also liken it to something that I also really recommend, which are those Usborne books, the Jeweled Moth and the Clockwork Sparrow. It kind of fits along with that kind of reading and enjoyment and things like that. So anyway, okay, it is August 31st and it's time to wrap this video up. And today I finished The Endurance. It's a audiobook about Ernest Shackleton, and it was phenomenal. To be honest, when you're talking about a trip to the Antarctic and some of the stuff that they went through, you're just, a whole book on this is probably thinking, well, it's going to be a little boring. And it wasn't. First of all, the timeline I had for Shackleton was all wrong, and at one point he telegraphs Winston Churchill because the war is just on, and he says, do we continue with this or not? And immediately my mind was thinking it's World War II, and that still was off my timeline. But then later on it's actually World War I, and I don't know why I completely skipped the fact that Winston Churchill was part of World War I. I don't know, but anyway, the narrator for that was brilliant. He knew how to read it in such a way to put the pauses where they were needed. He didn't change his voice a lot for the different characters, but if one was, say, from Scotland, he used the Scotch brogue to basically repeat his journal. The author did a great job in basically using journal entries and climate and information that we have about that area to basically explain a little bit more about the journal entries. But it was a really good living book. To be honest, I don't know if I could have read it as well as just listening to it. I love audiobooks because I'm a housekeeper, so I clean houses for other people, and I literally will put those on as I'm cleaning, and I'm getting so many books knocked out because of that. So the next one that's on my audiobook list to read is Mad Wolf's Daughter and the Poisonwood Bible, and so I'm kind of looking forward to reading those. Those were some of the books that I read this month, and I really enjoyed them. I don't think there was a book in the stack that I was just like, I could have done without that. So, but anyway, that wasn't a big list for me for this month. I'm okay with that. Those are going to be the books that I read this month. I will give you just a quick glimpse. Actually, I did read another book, but you can't see that for another couple months because it's part of a book club, and I switched 2 books around. So it's actually the one that I'm supposed to post after this next one, but I already read it, and it's already filmed, and it's now sitting on my computer, which will hopefully not crash before I can get it uploaded for you. But these are other books that I'm currently reading this month. But if you want to know what I am reading often, you can go ahead and subscribe to see more videos like this. You could follow me on Instagram because I show pictures of what we're doing with our read alouds and things like that, and you can check that out. You can follow me on Goodreads because this is the internet and everything's out there to share, so got a lot of books that I share on there. And I'm going to end this here. But until next time, have another cup of coffee and read another chapter.